The morning air was crisp when Lisa walked through the double doors of the Riverside Community Center for the first time. She carried a worn leather bag over her shoulder and wore a simple gray cardigan that had seen better days. Nothing about her appearance suggested anything remarkable. She looked like someone who might work at a library or maybe volunteer at a local food bank. Just another person trying to do something good with their time. The community center was buzzing with activity. Children ran through the hallways, their laughter echoing off the walls. Somewhere in the distance, someone was practicing scales on a violin, hitting more wrong notes than right ones. The smell of fresh coffee drifted from the staff room, mixing with the faint scent of old wood and floor polish that seemed to be part of the building itself. Lisa had moved to this quiet town just 2 weeks ago. After years of living in the city, the change felt strange but necessary. She needed somewhere peaceful, somewhere she could breathe again. The small apartment she'd rented was perfect in its simplicity. Just her, some books, and a lot of silence. When she'd seen the advertisement for volunteers at the community center, something inside her had stirred. Maybe this was exactly what she needed. The orientation was held in a cramped meeting room with folding chairs that squeaked every time someone shifted their weight. About 15 people had shown up, most of them retirees looking for ways to fill their days. Lisa sat in the back row, listening quietly as the director explained the center's mission. They offered free classes to families who couldn't afford expensive lessons elsewhere. Music, art, dance, literacy programs. It was the kind of place that ran on hope and dedication rather than money. When it came time for introductions, Lisa simply said she'd recently moved to town and wanted to help however she could. Her voice was soft, almost apologetic for taking up space. A few people smiled politely. Most barely looked up from the handouts they'd been given. The music department teachers sat together near the front. There were 3 of them, but one clearly dominated the group. His name was Gerald Whitmore, and he taught piano. He was probably in his late 50s, with silver hair that he'd styled carefully and an expensive watch that caught the light whenever he gestured. Everything about him screamed self-importance. When he spoke during the orientation, his voice carried that particular tone some people develop when they've spent too long being the smartest person in small rooms. Gerald explained the spring recital that was coming up in about 6 weeks. It was, he emphasized, the most important event of the year. Local donors attended. Sometimes even representatives from the Regional Arts Council showed up. This was their chance to prove that the community center wasn't just babysitting kids, but actually teaching them real skills. Real art, he said, with a dramatic pause that suggested he'd practiced it. During the coffee break, Lisa mentioned to the director that she might be interested in helping with the music program. She'd always loved music, she explained. Maybe she could help organize sheet music or prepare the recital programs. Simple tasks. Nothing too involved. The director's face lit up. They desperately needed help in that department, she said. Gerald was brilliant but overwhelming, and the 2 other teachers were part-time and already stretched thin. Would Lisa mind if she introduced her to Gerald right away? The introduction did not go well. Gerald looked Lisa up and down in about 3 seconds and clearly decided she wasn't worth much attention. When the director mentioned Lisa might help with the music program, he gave a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "How wonderful," he said in a tone that meant the opposite. "Do you have any musical background?" Lisa hesitated. "I studied music some years ago," she said carefully. "Oh, how nice. Did you take some piano lessons as a child?" Gerald's condescension was so thick you could practically see it hanging in the air. "Something like that," Lisa replied, her voice even quieter than before. Gerald turned back to the director without waiting for more. "Well, I'm sure we can find something for her to do. Filing, perhaps, or she could help set up chairs for the recital. We always need people for the practical matters." He said practical matters the way someone might say taking out the garbage. Lisa simply nodded. She was used to this kind of dismissal, though it still stung in a distant way, like an old bruise you'd forgotten about until someone pressed on it. Over the next week, Lisa settled into her role at the community center. She arrived early each morning and stayed late most evenings. The director officially made her the volunteer coordinator, which meant she helped with a bit of everything. She organized supply closets, coordinated schedules, and helped teachers who needed an extra pair of hands. She spent a fair amount of time near the music rooms, particularly because the spring recital was approaching and there were endless details to manage. Programs needed to be printed. Parents needed to be contacted about performance times. The small auditorium needed to be assessed for seating arrangements. This meant Lisa was often around when piano lessons were happening. Gerald taught in the largest music room, which had a beautiful old grand piano that was probably worth more than everything else in the building combined. The door was usually open, and sound carried into the hallway where Lisa often worked at a folding table, making phone calls and organizing paperwork. She couldn't help but listen to the lessons. Gerald was technically competent, she could hear that much, but he was also impatient and dismissive with students who struggled. When a teenage girl stumbled through a difficult passage for the third time, Gerald sighed loudly. "If you'd practice at home like I've told you, we wouldn't waste time like this," he said sharply. The girl's face flushed red. Lisa, sitting at her table in the hallway, felt her jaw tighten. She forced herself to focus on the spreadsheet in front of her. The other teachers were different. Mrs. Patterson taught violin and had infinite patience with even the youngest students. Mr. Chen, who taught guitar part-time, made every lesson feel like a conversation between friends. But Gerald set the tone for the music department, and his presence cast a long shadow. During her second week, Lisa was reorganizing the music library, a small room crammed with sheet music, old books, and dusty filing cabinets. Gerald walked in without knocking, startling her. "Oh, you're still here," he said, as if surprised the help hadn't disappeared when he wasn't looking. "I need you to make copies of these." He thrust a stack of sheet music at her. 20 copies of each. The recital is coming up faster than these students are improving, so we need extra practice materials. "Of course," Lisa said, taking the stack. Gerald was already turning to leave when he paused and glanced back. "You know, if you're really interested in music, you should attend the recital. It might be educational for you. You'd see what real dedication looks like." He didn't wait for a response. Lisa stood there holding the sheet music, staring at the empty doorway. For just a moment, her fingers tightened on the pages, wrinkling the edges slightly. Then she carefully smoothed them out and went to make the copies. She didn't tell Gerald that she could read the music she was copying. She didn't mention that she recognized the pieces, knew their histories, could hear them perfectly in her mind just by looking at the notes on the page. She certainly didn't say that she'd performed some of these very pieces in concert halls that held 3,000 people. There was no point in saying any of that. Lisa had come to this small town to be invisible, to be ordinary, to finally breathe without the weight of expectations crushing her chest. She'd spent 15 years being extraordinary, and it had cost her nearly everything that mattered. Now she just wanted to be helpful, quiet, unremarkable. As she fed sheet music into the copy machine, listening to its rhythmic whir and click, Lisa told herself that this was enough. This was what peace looked like. Gerald's condescension, the way he looked through her rather than at her, the assumption that she was just another well-meaning volunteer with no real skills, all of this was fine. Perfect, even. It meant she could hide in plain sight. What Lisa didn't know yet was that invisibility, like silence, can only last so long. The universe has a way of pushing people back into the light, whether they want it or not. And sometimes that push comes from the least expected direction, at the worst possible time in the most public way imaginable. But for now, standing in the copy room with the afternoon sun slanting through the dusty window, Lisa was just a volunteer helping out at a community center. Nothing more. Nothing less. Exactly what she wanted to be. The crisis happened on a Tuesday afternoon, 3 weeks before the spring recital. Lisa was in the main office sorting donation receipts when she heard the scream. It wasn't a scared scream or a hurt scream, but something worse. It was the sound of devastating news being processed in real time. Mrs. Patterson, the violin teacher, came running out of the music wing, her face pale. "Call an ambulance," she shouted to no one in particular. "There's been an accident." Lisa's heart jumped into her throat. She dropped the receipts and followed the small crowd that was forming near the parking lot. What she saw made her stomach drop. A car had backed into another car, and caught between them was a young woman she recognized as one of Gerald's advanced piano students. The girl, whose name was Rachel, was sitting on the ground, cradling her right hand against her chest. Even from a distance, Lisa could see that something was very wrong. The hand was bent at an angle that hands shouldn't bend. The ambulance arrived within 10 minutes. Rachel was crying, not from pain, but from something deeper. "The recital," she kept saying. "The recital is in 3 weeks. I'm supposed to play. I've been practicing for 6 months. Gerald had appeared by this point, and for once his composure had cracked. His face was gray. He stood there watching as the paramedics carefully examined Rachel's hand and wrist. One of them shook his head slightly. Even without medical training, everyone standing there understood what that meant. Broken. Badly. The ambulance left with Rachel and her mother. The crowd dispersed slowly, people whispering to each other. Lisa noticed Gerald standing alone in the parking lot, staring at nothing. For the first time since she'd met him, he looked genuinely shaken. The next morning's staff meeting had an atmosphere like a funeral. The director had received a call from Rachel's mother. The wrist was broken in 3 places. Surgery was scheduled for the end of the week. Recovery time would be at least 8 weeks, possibly longer. There would be no recital performance. No chance at all. It's terrible for Rachel, the director said, her voice heavy. Just terrible. But we also need to acknowledge that this creates a significant problem for the recital itself. Gerald, who had been sitting silently, finally spoke. His voice had lost its usual confident edge. Rachel was performing Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2. The second movement. It's the centerpiece of the entire program. We scheduled the recital timing around it. We advertised it. We told the donors specifically that they'd hear one of the most beautiful pieces ever written for piano. The room was quiet. Everyone understood the implications. The spring recital wasn't just a nice event for families. It was the center's biggest fundraiser of the year. The donors who attended wrote checks that kept programs running. They expected quality. They expected to be impressed. A program missing its centerpiece would be noticed, and not in a good way. Can another student learn it? The director asked hopefully. We still have 3 weeks. Gerald laughed, but there was no humor in it. The Rachmaninoff second? In 3 weeks? That piece takes months to learn properly, years really to perform it well. It's one of the most technically demanding pieces in the entire piano repertoire. My other advanced students are already performing other pieces, and even if they weren't, none of them are at Rachel's level. He paused and his voice dropped. Rachel was special. A once-in-a-decade student. That's why I chose this piece for her. Mrs. Patterson spoke up quietly. What if we reorganized the program? Made it shorter? Focused on the other performances? And tell our major donors that we're cutting the evening short because we couldn't deliver what we promised? Gerald's frustration was starting to show. Do you know how that will look? The meeting dragged on for another 20 minutes, going in circles. No solutions emerged. Lisa sat in her usual spot at the back, saying nothing. She felt genuinely sorry for Rachel, who must be devastated. She also felt a growing sense of dread about what was coming. She'd been around people like Gerald long enough to know how they operated when they were cornered. Sure enough, as the meeting was wrapping up, Gerald's eyes landed on Lisa. She saw the moment the idea formed in his mind, saw the calculation happen behind his eyes, saw the cruel little smile start to form at the corners of his mouth. Wait, Gerald said, his voice suddenly taking on a theatrical quality. We're forgetting our resident music enthusiast. Every head in the room turned to look at Lisa. She felt her chest tighten. Lisa here has told us she studied music, Gerald continued, warming to his theme. She's been so eager to help with the music program. Well, here's her chance to really help. He spread his hands in a gesture of generous magnanimity. She could learn the piece. She's here every day anyway. The piano is available every evening after classes end. 3 weeks is tight, but for someone truly dedicated to music, it's possible. The director looked uncertain. Gerald, that seems like a lot to ask. This is a professional level piece, isn't it? It is indeed, Gerald agreed, his eyes never leaving Lisa. But Lisa has assured me she studied music. Unless that was an exaggeration? His tone made it clear what he thought. Lisa felt trapped. Every person in that room was looking at her now. She could feel their expectations, their hopes, their desperation for a solution to this problem. She could also feel Gerald's cruelty, barely disguised as encouragement. He was absolutely certain she would fail. He was doing this to humiliate her, to put her in her place once and for all. I'm not sure I'm the right person for this, Lisa said carefully, trying to keep her voice steady. It's a very difficult piece. I wouldn't want to disappoint everyone. Oh, come now, Gerald said, his voice dripping with false warmth. You've been hovering around the music room since you arrived. Surely you didn't think we'd only need help with filing and copying. This is what supporting the arts really means. rolling up your sleeves when things get difficult. The director looked at Lisa with genuine hope in her eyes. Would you at least try? I know it's a huge ask, but if there's any chance at all, it would save the recital. It would save the whole funding cycle for next year. Lisa felt the walls closing in. She knew exactly what would happen if she said yes. She'd be forced back into a world she'd worked so hard to leave behind. But if she said no, she'd be letting down all these people who were counting on her. Worse, she'd be confirming Gerald's low opinion of her. Not that she should care what Gerald thought, but something in his smug expression made her spine straighten just a little. The piece you're talking about, Lisa said slowly. Could I see the sheet music? Gerald pulled it from his folder with a flourish, like a magician revealing a trick. He handed it to her, and she could see the satisfaction in his eyes. He knew she probably couldn't even read it properly. Lisa looked at the music. The familiar notes, the markings, the impossible runs and chords. She'd performed this piece more times than she could count. She'd recorded it for a major label. She'd played it in Moscow and London and New York. She knew every single note by heart. I'll try, she heard herself say. I can't promise it will be performance quality, but I'll do my best. The relief in the room was palpable. The director actually looked like she might cry. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you so much. Whatever you need, just ask. Gerald's smile was victorious. Excellent. I'll check in on your progress regularly. Don't hesitate to ask if you need help with the difficult sections. Though I warn you, most of it is difficult. He was already imagining her failure, she could tell. Already planning how he'd graciously step in to save the day when she inevitably gave up. After the meeting, people came up to thank Lisa personally. They patted her shoulder, praised her courage, told her not to worry too much about perfection. Their kindness made everything worse somehow. These were good people in a hard situation, and she was about to deceive them all, just in a different way than they expected. Mrs. Patterson pulled her aside in the hallway. You don't have to do this, you know, she said quietly. Gerald was out of line putting you on the spot like that. It's okay, Lisa replied. I want to help. Have you really studied piano before? Seriously, I mean. Lisa chose her words carefully. I've spent a lot of time with piano. A long time. Mrs. Patterson nodded, though she still looked concerned. Well, if anyone can pull off a miracle, maybe it's you. And if you can't, we'll figure something else out. Don't let Gerald make you feel bad about it. That evening, after all the classes had ended and the building had emptied out, Lisa sat alone at the grand piano in the main music room. The sheet music was spread out in front of her, though she didn't really need it. Her hands rested on the keys, not pressing down, just feeling the cool ivory under her fingers. She'd told herself she was done with all this. Done with performance, done with pressure, done with the suffocating weight of being extraordinary. She'd walked away from a career that most musicians would kill for, and she'd done it deliberately, carefully, cutting every tie that bound her to that life. She'd changed her appearance, changed her location, changed everything she could about herself, and now here she was, about to step right back into it, even if only for one night. The irony wasn't lost on her. Gerald had meant to humiliate her, to expose her as a fraud. Instead, he'd created the one situation that would expose the truth. She could refuse, of course. She could tell the director tomorrow that she'd tried and couldn't do it. That would be the sensible choice. The safe choice, but something in Gerald's smug face kept appearing in her mind. The way he'd looked at her like she was nothing. Like she was less than nothing. It wasn't about ego, Lisa told herself. It wasn't about proving anything. It was about all those kids who were working so hard, preparing for the recital. It was about the center's funding, the programs that would continue or disappear based on donor satisfaction. It was about Rachel, lying in a hospital bed with a broken wrist and broken dreams. At least that's what Lisa told herself as she finally pressed down on the keys and began to play. The sound filled the empty room, rich and full. Her fingers moved across the keyboard, muscle memory taking over even after all these years away. The opening measures of the Rachmaninoff flowed out, melancholy and beautiful. She'd forgotten how good it felt, how terrifying, how utterly right. In a storage closet down the hall, old Mr. Rodriguez, the evening janitor, stopped pushing his cart. He stood perfectly still, listening. He'd worked at this community center for 12 years and had heard thousands of piano lessons and practice sessions. But he'd never heard anything like this. He walked slowly toward the music room and stood in the doorway, mop still in hand, staring at the quiet woman at the piano. She had her eyes closed, her whole body moving with the music. It wasn't just playing. It was something else entirely. Something that made his eyes sting with unexpected emotion. When she finished the section she'd been working on, Lisa opened her eyes and saw him standing there. They looked at each other for a long moment. "Miss," he finally said, his voice hoarse. "You played that like your heart was breaking." Lisa's smile was sad. "Sometimes that's the only way to play it." Mr. Rodriguez nodded slowly. "I don't know much about fancy music, but I know that what you just did, that wasn't beginner stuff. That wasn't even advanced stuff. That was something else." "Please don't tell anyone," Lisa said quietly. "I just want to help with the recital and then go back to being nobody special." The old man studied her face. "That's a lonely way to live, being nobody when you're somebody." "It's better than the alternative," Lisa replied. He nodded again, though he didn't look convinced. "Your secret's safe with me. But secrets like yours have a way of coming out eventually. They're too big to stay hidden forever." After he left, Lisa sat at the piano for a long time, not playing, just thinking. 3 weeks until the recital. 3 weeks of pretending to learn a piece she'd mastered 15 years ago. 3 weeks of letting Gerald think he'd won, right up until the moment she'd prove him spectacularly wrong. She should have felt excited, or vindicated, or at least satisfied. Instead, she just felt tired and a little bit sad. Because Mr. Rodriguez was right. Once she performed that piece, everything would change. People would ask questions. Her carefully constructed new life would crack open. The past she'd worked so hard to escape would come flooding back, but she'd made her choice. She'd said yes, and whatever happened next, she'd have to face it. Lisa put her fingers back on the keys and began to play again. The first week passed in a strange blur of deception. During the day, Lisa maintained her role as the helpful volunteer coordinator. She organized schedules, answered phones, and helped teachers with whatever they needed. She smiled politely when people asked about her practice sessions, saying she was working hard but wasn't sure she'd get there in time. Gerald made a point of checking on her progress with theatrical concern. On Wednesday, he stopped by her table in the hallway. "How's the practicing going?" he asked loud enough for other staff members to hear. "Finding those difficult passages manageable?" "It's challenging," Lisa replied, keeping her eyes on her paperwork. "But I'm learning." "Well, don't be discouraged if it doesn't work out," Gerald said with false sympathy. "This piece has defeated much more experienced pianists. If you need to withdraw, no one would think less of you." "Well," he paused meaningfully. "Not much less, anyway." Mrs. Patterson, who was passing by, shot Gerald a disapproving look. After he'd walked away, she leaned down to Lisa. "Don't listen to him. He's being cruel." "I know," Lisa said softly. "It's okay, but it wasn't really okay." Every interaction with Gerald made her more determined to see this through, which worried her. She'd told herself this was about helping the center, about saving the recital. But somewhere in her heart, she knew part of it was about wiping that smug expression off Gerald's face. That wasn't a good reason to do anything, and she knew it. The evenings were different. After everyone left, usually around 7, Lisa would wait an extra 30 minutes to make sure the building was truly empty. Well, mostly empty. Mr. Rodriguez was always there, quietly doing his cleaning rounds. He'd become an unexpected ally, sometimes bringing her coffee or just sitting in the back of the room, listening. On the Thursday of that first week, as Lisa finished playing through the entire second movement without stopping, Mr. Rodriguez spoke up from his seat near the door. "Can I ask you something personal?" Lisa's hand stilled on the keys. "Sure. Why are you hiding? Someone who plays like you should be on stages somewhere. People should be paying hundreds of dollars to hear you." Lisa was quiet for a moment. "They used to," she finally said. "What happened?" She turned on the piano bench to face him. Something about the dim light and the empty room made it easier to talk. "My mother got sick when I was 28. Terminal cancer. I was touring all the time, performing maybe 200 days a year. Living in hotel rooms, flying between countries. It was everything I'd worked for since I was 5 years old." Mr. Rodriguez nodded slowly, waiting. "When she got diagnosed, I came home, took a break from touring, which was supposed to be temporary, but she got worse fast. The treatments weren't working. I stayed with her, canceled more concerts. My management company wasn't happy. They said I was throwing away my career. They said they were nurses for this kind of thing. But she wasn't just anyone. She was your mother." "Exactly. She was my mother." The person who'd sat through 10,000 hours of my practice, who'd driven me to lessons before school and competitions on weekends, who'd believed in me when I wanted to quit. Lisa's voice caught slightly. How could I be on a stage in Berlin when she was dying in a hospital bed? You couldn't, Mr. Rodriguez said simply. I stayed with her for 8 months. Until the end. I held her hand when she died. Lisa looked down at her own hands, these hands that could make a piano sing. After the funeral, I couldn't go back. Everyone kept telling me I should, that my mother would have wanted me to continue, that I was too talented to waste. But every time I thought about performing, about the pressure and the travel and the constant judgment, I felt like I couldn't breathe. So you walked away. I walked away, changed my name legally, moved to different cities every few months, took simple jobs, tried to figure out who I was when I wasn't performing. She smiled sadly. Turns out I'm not very good at being nobody. Because here I am, about to perform again. Mr. Rodriguez stood up slowly, his knees creaking. Want to know what I think? Sure. I think you're not hiding from performing. You're hiding from grief. And hiding from grief doesn't make it go away. It just makes it quieter for a while. His words hit harder than Lisa expected. She felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them away quickly. Maybe you're right. My wife died 6 years ago, he said quietly. I tried to hide from it too. Worked double shifts, kept myself so busy I'd fall asleep the second my head hit the pillow. Thought if I didn't stop moving, the sadness couldn't catch me. He shook his head. Doesn't work that way. Eventually you have to sit with it, feel it, let it be part of you without letting it be all of you. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Finally, Lisa asked, Do you think performing this piece is a mistake? I think, Mr. Rodriguez said carefully, that you're going to play it no matter what I say. You already decided. Now you're just waiting to see what happens after. He was right, of course. Lisa had made her choice the moment she'd agreed to do this. Everything since then had been inevitability playing out. The second week was harder. Word had spread around the center that Lisa was preparing to perform the Rachmaninoff. Students started asking her about it, their faces bright with curiosity. Parents thanked her for stepping up. The director kept mentioning how grateful everyone was, how this was really saving the entire event. The pressure was building, but not in the way people thought. Lisa wasn't worried about the performance itself. She could play this piece in her sleep. What worried her was the aftermath, because Mr. Rodriguez was right about secrets too. Once she performed at this level, questions would be asked. Someone would probably film it on their phone. In today's world of social media, you couldn't do anything remarkable without it spreading. She'd seen it happen before. A street musician going viral because someone captured their incredible talent. A waiter singing at work becoming an overnight sensation. There was no such thing as anonymous brilliance anymore. The internet wouldn't allow it. On Tuesday of the second week, something unexpected happened. Gerald actually showed up during one of her evening practice sessions. Lisa had just started playing when she heard the door open behind her. She stopped immediately, her heart racing. Don't stop on my account, Gerald said, walking into the room. I wanted to hear how you're progressing. This was a trap. Lisa knew it instantly. If she played poorly, he'd have confirmation of her inadequacy. If she played well, he'd know something was off. She couldn't win. I'm still working on the difficult sections, she said, standing up from the piano bench. I'm not ready for an audience yet. Come now, Gerald said, settling into a chair near the door. We're less than 2 weeks out. I need to assess whether we should proceed with you, or if I need to prepare an alternative. Play what you've learned. Lisa's mind raced. She could refuse, but that would create its own problems. She could play it badly on purpose, but years of muscle memory made that almost impossible. Or she could play just well enough to seem like she was making progress, but not so well that it revealed her true ability. She sat back down at the piano, her hands shaking slightly. Not from nerves about playing, but from the tightrope she was about to walk. She started the piece deliberately stiff in her movements. She played the notes correctly, but without the emotional depth she normally brought to them. She added a couple of small hesitations, moments where she appeared to be thinking about what came next. She made one measure slightly rushed, as if she wasn't quite confident about the timing. It was possibly the hardest performance she'd ever given, playing precisely well enough but not too well. When she finished the section, she looked up at Gerald. His face was unreadable. Interesting, he said finally. You're getting the notes right. More than I expected, actually. I've been practicing a lot, Lisa said, I can tell. But you're playing it like a mathematics problem. Notes on a page. Do you understand what this piece is about? His tone had shifted to that of a lecturer. Rachmaninoff wrote this after coming out of a deep depression. It's about rebirth, about finding yourself again after being lost. You're playing it like you're reading a grocery list. Lisa bit back the response she wanted to give. She could explain exactly what this piece was about. She could tell him about the times she'd played it while processing her own grief, how the music had given shape to feelings she couldn't express in words, but she just nodded instead. I'll keep working on the emotional aspects, she said quietly. Gerald stood up, and for a moment his expression was almost pitying. Lisa, I appreciate your effort. I really do. But I think we need to be realistic. You've learned more than I expected, but this piece requires artistry, not just accuracy. Maybe we should discuss alternatives. I still have 10 days, Lisa said. Let me use them, he sighed. Very well. But I'm preparing a backup plan. I'll perform a simpler piece myself if needed. We can't have you freeze up on stage or play it mechanically like you just did. That would be worse than not performing it at all. After he left, Lisa sat motionless at the piano for a long time. She felt dirty somehow, like she'd betrayed the music itself by playing it so poorly on purpose. The Rachmaninoff deserved better than what she'd just given it. That was hard to watch, came Mr. Rodriguez's voice from the doorway. She hadn't even known he was there. I had to do it, Lisa said. If I'd played it properly, he would have known something was wrong. Maybe. Or maybe he would have just been happy that the recital was saved. Mr. Rodriguez came into the room. You're making this complicated. You're playing games when you could just be honest. I can't be honest. Not yet. Then when? After the performance, when everyone finds out anyway. You think this is going to end with you just going back to filing papers and answering phones? Lisa knew he was right, but she couldn't seem to help herself. She'd spent 3 years building a wall between her past and present. The idea of tearing it down deliberately felt impossible, even if she knew it was going to crumble anyway. The third week arrived with the weight of countdown. 10 days, 9 days, 8 days. The center was buzzing with recital preparations. Programs were being printed. The auditorium was being cleaned. Students were having final rehearsals. The excitement was building toward something Lisa both wanted and dreaded. On the Wednesday before the recital, exactly 4 days out, Rachel came to visit. Her mother pushed her wheelchair into the center, and Lisa saw her from across the lobby. The girl's right hand was in a heavy cast, and her eyes were red-rimmed like she'd been crying recently. Mrs. Patterson saw her too, and rushed over with hugs. Soon a small group had gathered, everyone expressing sympathy and offering encouragement. Lisa stayed back, watching from a distance. Then Rachel saw her. The girl wheeled herself over, navigating through the crowd with determination. When she reached Lisa, she looked up with an expression that was hard to read. You're the one learning my piece, Rachel said. It wasn't a question. I'm trying to, Lisa replied carefully. Can you do it? Really? Rachel's voice was intense. Because Mr. Whitmore keeps saying we need a backup plan. He keeps implying you're not going to pull it off. Lisa crouched down so she was at eye level with the girl. I'm going to do everything I can. I promise you that. It's not just about the recital, Rachel said, and now tears were forming in her eyes. That piece, it meant everything to me. I've been working on it for 6 months. It was going to be my moment, you know? The thing I'd remember forever. And now it's gone. And some volunteer is going to play it instead, and Mr. Whitmore acts like it's going to be a disaster. The pain in Rachel's voice cut through all of Lisa's carefully constructed walls. This wasn't about Gerald's ego or the center's funding or even Lisa's own complicated relationship with performing. This was about a young woman whose dreams had been shattered by bad luck and bad timing. Rachel, Lisa said quietly, I can't give you back what you lost. I can't change what happened. But I can promise you this. When I play that piece on Saturday night, I'm going to play it with everything I have. I'm going to honor the work you put into it. And maybe in some small way that will matter. Rachel wiped her eyes with her good hand. Why do you even care? You're just a volunteer, Lisa smiled sadly. Because I know what it's like to lose something you love. And because you deserve to have that piece performed beautifully, even if you can't be the one doing it. Something in Lisa's tone made Rachel look at her more closely. You're not just some random person who plays a little piano, are you? No, Lisa admitted. I'm not. Then why is everyone acting like this is probably going to fail? Because they don't know. And I've been letting them not know. Rachel studied her face. "You're going to surprise everyone, aren't you?" "Probably." For the first time since the accident, Rachel smiled. "Good. Mr. Whitmore deserves to be surprised. He's been so condescending about the whole thing." That evening, Lisa played the Rachmaninoff all the way through 3 times. She played it the way it was meant to be played, with all the emotion and artistry she'd been holding back. She played it for Rachel, for her mother, for everyone who'd ever lost something precious and had to watch someone else take their place. Mr. Rodriguez sat in his usual spot, not even pretending to clean anymore. When she finished the last notes of the 3rd run-through, he stood and applauded slowly. "Saturday night," he said, "is going to be something special." "Saturday night," Lisa replied, "is going to change everything." She was more right than she knew. Saturday arrived with the kind of perfect spring weather that felt almost mocking in its beauty. Clear blue sky, gentle breeze, warm sunshine. Lisa woke up early in her small apartment, staring at the ceiling and wondering if she'd made a terrible mistake. It wasn't too late to back out. She could call the director right now, claim she was sick, let Gerald perform his backup piece. Everything could go back to normal, except it couldn't. Not really. She'd made a promise to Rachel. More than that, she'd made a promise to herself, even if she hadn't fully admitted it until now. She was done hiding. Tonight would be the end of one life and maybe, possibly, the beginning of something else. She spent the day trying to stay calm. Took a long walk, made tea she didn't drink, tried to read a book but couldn't focus on the words. By 4 in the afternoon, she started getting ready. She'd bought a simple black dress for the occasion, nothing fancy. It was the kind of dress a volunteer coordinator might wear to a formal event. Appropriate but unremarkable. Looking at herself in the mirror, Lisa almost laughed. She'd spent 3 years trying to become invisible, and in a few hours she was going to do the one thing guaranteed to make her visible again. The universe had a strange sense of humor. The community center was transformed when she arrived at 5:30. The small auditorium had been decorated with flowers donated by a local shop. Chairs were arranged in neat rows. A sound system had been set up. The piano, that beautiful grand piano, sat on the small stage like a sleeping animal waiting to wake up. The center was already buzzing with activity. Students in their performance clothes ran around nervously. Parents tried to corral them while also setting up refreshments in the lobby. Teachers gave last-minute instructions. The director rushed from place to place, checking details with a clipboard in hand. Gerald was there too, of course. He wore an expensive suit and was talking to several older couples who looked like they might be the important donors everyone kept mentioning. He was charming and confident, every inch the respected music teacher. When he saw Lisa arrive, he excused himself and walked over. "Well," he said, looking her up and down, "you showed up. I wasn't entirely certain you would." "I made a commitment," Lisa said simply. "Indeed. Though I hope you understand that I have my piece prepared just in case. If you feel overwhelmed once you're on stage, just give me a signal and I'll step in. There's no shame in recognizing when something is beyond your capabilities." Before Lisa could respond, Mrs. Patterson appeared at her elbow. "Gerald, leave her alone. She doesn't need your negativity right now." "I'm being realistic, not negative," Gerald protested. "This is one of the most demanding pieces in the repertoire. I'm simply ensuring we have contingencies." "Your concern is noted," Mrs. Patterson said coldly. "Now go attend to your donors and let Lisa prepare in peace." After he walked away, Mrs. Patterson turned to Lisa with worry in her eyes. "How are you feeling?" Honestly, I'm not nervous about playing. I'm nervous about everything else." Mrs. Patterson looked confused but didn't have time to ask what that meant because the director was calling for all performers to gather for a pre-show meeting. The meeting was held in one of the classrooms. About 30 students of various ages squeezed in along with their teachers. The director gave an encouraging speech about how hard everyone had worked and how proud she was. She reminded them about stage entrances and exits, about bowing, about what to do if they made a mistake. "Keep going," she said. "The audience wants you to succeed." Lisa stood at the back, feeling strangely detached from it all. These kids were genuinely nervous, their futures as musicians uncertain. For her, the outcome of the performance itself was assured. It was everything that came after that was uncertain. Rachel was there too, in her wheelchair near the front. She'd insisted on coming even though she couldn't perform. When the director asked if anyone had any questions, Rachel raised her good hand. "I just want to say," Rachel began, her voice shaking slightly, "that even though I can't play tonight, I'm grateful that the piece I worked so hard on is still going to be performed. And I'm grateful to Lisa for being brave enough to try." Everyone turned to look at Lisa. She felt her face flush. Several students started clapping, and soon the whole room was applauding. It was kindly meant, but made Lisa feel even worse about the deception she'd been maintaining. After the meeting ended, Lisa found a quiet corner in the music room where she could be alone for a few minutes. She sat at the piano, not playing, just resting her hands on the keys. This instrument had been her home for most of her life. It had been her joy and her burden, her salvation and her prison. Tonight it would be all of those things again. "Can I sit with you?" Lisa turned to see Rachel maneuvering her wheelchair into the room. Of course. Rachel positioned herself near the piano bench. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Rachel said, "You're not going to mess this up, are you?" "No," Lisa said. "I'm not. I didn't think so. There's something about the way you talk about music, like you understand it in a deeper way than most people." Rachel paused. "Will you tell me the truth about who you are?" "Eventually, I mean. After tonight." "Yes," Lisa promised. "After tonight, I'll tell you everything." "Good." Rachel smiled. "I think your story is probably interesting." At 6:30, the doors opened and the audience started arriving. Lisa watched from backstage as the auditorium filled up. There were easily 200 people, maybe more. Families with cameras, the important-looking donors Gerald had been schmoozing, local press with notepads. Even the mayor was there, which surprised Lisa until she remembered this was a small town where a community center recital was probably newsworthy. The program started at 7. The youngest students went first, performing simple pieces with varying degrees of success. The audience applauded enthusiastically for everyone, even the little girl who forgot her place halfway through and had to start over. It was sweet and genuine, the kind of community support that made places like this center important. As the evening progressed, the pieces got more complex. The older students, the advanced ones, performed with real skill. Lisa could hear the months of practice in their playing. Gerald's other students did him credit, she had to admit. They were well-trained and competent. The Rachmaninoff was scheduled for the end of the program, right before the finale. As the performance before hers concluded, Lisa felt her heart start to beat faster. Not from anxiety about playing, but from the knowledge of what was about to happen. Once she walked out on that stage, there was no going back. The director walked to the microphone at the side of the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, we now come to a very special part of our program. As some of you know, our student Rachel was meant to perform Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 this evening. Due to an unfortunate accident, she's unable to perform." The audience made sympathetic noises. Rachel, sitting in the front row in her wheelchair, managed a brave smile. "However," the director continued, "we are incredibly fortunate that one of our volunteers, Lisa, agreed to step in. She had only 3 weeks to prepare this piece, which is one of the most challenging works in the piano repertoire. Please join me in giving her a warm welcome and encouragement as she attempts this remarkable piece. Lisa?" The applause was supportive, but also carried an undercurrent of curiosity mixed with doubt. Lisa could feel it. They were being polite, but they expected an earnest failure. A noble attempt that would fall short. Lisa stood up from the backstage chair and walked toward the stage entrance. As she passed Gerald, who was standing in the wings, he whispered, "Remember, just give me the signal if you need me to take over." She didn't respond, just kept walking. The stage lights were bright, warming her face as she crossed to the piano. The audience was a dark mass beyond the lights, hundreds of faces she couldn't quite see. She sat down at the bench, adjusted it slightly, and placed her hands on the keys. This was the moment, the last second of her anonymous life. In the front row, Rachel was leaning forward, her eyes locked on Lisa. In the wings, Gerald watched with barely concealed anticipation of her failure. In the audience, hundreds of people waited politely, expecting competence at best. Lisa took a deep breath, closed her eyes for just a second, and then began to play. The opening notes of the Rachmaninoff Second Concerto are some of the most recognizable in classical music. Rich romantic chords that fill the space and set the tone for everything that follows. Lisa played them with the weight they deserved, and even in those first few seconds, something shifted in the room. This wasn't the sound of someone who'd learned a piece in 3 weeks. This wasn't even the sound of a talented amateur. This was something else entirely. The audience, which had been settling in for a polite listening experience, went completely still. The quality of the silence changed. It became the kind of silence that happens when people realize they're witnessing something extraordinary. Lisa's hands moved across the keyboard with fluid certainty. The difficult passages that would make most pianists hesitate flowed from her fingers like water. But it wasn't just technical skill. It was the interpretation, the emotional depth, the way she made the piano sing with human feeling. This was the way she'd played in concert halls around the world. This was the pianist she'd been before grief and exhaustion had driven her into hiding. This was who she really was, and she was done pretending otherwise. In the wings, Gerald's face had gone pale. His mouth was slightly open in shock. He'd heard this piece performed many times by professionals and students. But what was coming from that stage was on another level entirely. Mrs. Patterson stood next to him, and tears were streaming down her face. She'd known Lisa was good, but this was revelation. In the front row, Rachel had both hands pressed to her mouth, her cast forgotten. Her eyes were wide with wonder and disbelief. This was the piece she'd worked so hard on, and it was being honored in a way she'd never imagined possible. The mayor, who'd come expecting a pleasant community event, found himself leaning forward in his chair, completely captivated. The press, who'd been ready to write a standard feel-good piece about community arts, were scrambling for their cameras and phones, realizing they were witnessing something newsworthy, and the donors, those wealthy supporters who'd seen countless performances, were exchanging looks of absolute astonishment. Lisa was lost in the music now. The auditorium, the audience, everything faded away except for the conversation between her hands and the piano. This piece, which she'd performed so many times, felt different tonight. It wasn't about perfection or technique or impressing anyone. It was about truth. It was about finally stopping running. It was about letting herself be seen, completely and fully, for the first time in 3 years. The second movement of the concerto is famous for its beautiful main theme, a melody that's been used in movies and commercials, that makes people cry even if they don't know why. When Lisa reached this section, she played it with such tenderness and longing that grown men in the audience found their eyes getting wet. This was the music of loss and love, of memory and hope, of endings and beginnings, and Lisa poured everything into it. All the grief for her mother, all the years of hiding, all the loneliness of being extraordinary in a world that demanded you be ordinary, all of it went into the music. The technical passages that showed off a pianist's skill, the runs and chords that required perfect finger independence, she executed flawlessly. But they weren't show-off moments. They were necessary parts of the emotional story the piece was telling. As she built toward the climax of the movement, the entire audience seemed to be holding their breath. The music swelled, filling every corner of the auditorium, demanding to be felt in the chest and stomach, not just heard with the ears. And then, the final section, the resolution. The place where all the tension and beauty and sadness comes together and finds, if not peace, then at least acceptance.